kind of just talked about the failure of the Build Back Better agenda and how it is, going to be shelved now. It's pretty much over. So that massive social spending package is done with. And curious what your take is on how everything unfolded.
Well, I guess the biggest framework that I can think of for this is the metaphor of a sizable portion of what passes as the sport of wrestling in the United States. There is a sizable part of professional wrestling in which the same employer employs both of the wrestlers, carefully choreographs every step of their combat, including who the winner is, which is planned in advance as well. And the whole thing is a kind of performative extravaganza aimed at generating the revenue from television and other coverage, attendance at the so called fights. And everything stays pretty much the way it is. And everybody enjoys this combat, even though almost everyone knows that it's a total fakery and has nothing to do with a genuine contestation whatsoever. For me, Republicans and Democrats, in the main, are the two sides of one of these choreographed wrestling matches. They are paid now more than ever before by the same corporate sector of our economy. To use the words of the father of Kamala Harris, who referred to her as having been captured by her donors. He shouldn't have signaled her out. I'm sure that's a familial issue, not a political one. But the notion of being captured by your donors applies to an awful, awful lot of them. That's no doubt true. And I see that as a victory for capitalism. It allows the horror of what we see, a system that is producing levels of inequality that we thought were historically behind us in terms of centuries, let alone in our modern times. We're going full speed ahead backwards to create new pharaohs who, instead of building pyramids, compete to sit in rocket ships going around the world while the numbers of people in poverty and starving and all the rest go out. It's a spectacle which, because of the struggles of the past, is reaching, I think, millions of people and pushing them into a critical position. And I'm mindful, because I know you guys know about it too, that there are labor movements exploding across the United States. I'm an academic, so I was struck this last week by the decision in California where the teaching assistants, the graduate students, and so on have simply mobilized so effectively that the university caved. It couldn't even carry out the semblance of a fight because of the solidarity that the young folks who organized that movement there at the University of California achieved. And when you put that together with Nabisco and Kellogg and John Deere and all the rest of it, I see a level of excitement, a level of anger, a level of hope that gives me a lot of good feeling about what might happen. And the other way to put the same point that might be of interest to you is that I have never seen capitalism, at least the Western capitalism of North America, Western Europe, Japan, lumping that under the name Western for the moment. I've never seen it awash in the level of crises upon crises upon crises, and displaying a kind of almost caricaturish incompetence. I mean, that the richest country one of the richest countries in the world, the US, has failed so miserably in coping with this pandemic. You know, here we are with 4% or roughly 4.5% of the world's population, and we have whatever it is, 17%, whatever the latest numbers are, of the world's deaths. I mean, that's a level of failure on a literally an epic kind of scale. And so for me, I see a highly problematized capitalism limping along from crisis to crisis with abundant displays of inability to cope, alongside the beginnings of a labor movement kind of waking up. And if I could add one point, a comparison historically. While the current economic difficulties we're in are very severe, they're not yet as bad as things got in the Great Depression of the 1930s. But I would remind everyone, the Great Depression hits in October of 1929, and the massive movement of the American working class to the political left doesn't really get underway until 1933 or 34. In other words, it takes time. It's a little bit like a working class doesn't want to believe how bad it's getting, doesn't want to undertake the difficult and costly to the working class struggle to make things stop deteriorating this way. And I think we may be now enough years into the after effects of the 2008 and 9 Great Recession, combined with this pandemic and the collapse of the economy in 2020 and most of this year, to finally say, okay, this is intolerable, and to come out of a pandemic and a crisis to be told that you're now going to have an inflation in which the prices go up significantly more than your wages do. I mean, it's too much. And the numbers for people quitting their jobs, the bitterness, the anger, it's not just culture wars. It is the bubbling up from below of a very profound economic divide. And if the Democrats, as your commentary shows, if the Democrats do not seize this moment in the way that Roosevelt had to, well, then they are letting go an opportunity, but it's not because it isn't there. It's because they are captured by their donors.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to hear what you think about this. You mentioned capitalism is limping along and in a series of crises, and it's obvious that it is. At the same time, it seems as resilient as ever. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a meaningful threat to it. So it's kind of this weird situation in which it's a permanent state of crisis without obvious alternatives bubbling up. This labor upsurge, the labor militancy that we're seeing, still small in absolute terms, but definitely more active than it has in at least in the decades that I've been around. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts as to what's driving it. Is it and like how far can it go?
Well, let me react. I'm not sure which it refers to, but
the labor upsurge.
Okay, well, before I get to that, if I may comment on one thing you said, capitalism looks like it's coming back or it's in okay shape. Let me push back a little bit on that with some things for you to think about. The United States now has the greatest level of debt in its history: government debt, corporate debt, household debt. This is an economy which has been living on debt and shows no sign of relieving that problem. Indeed, the rising prices relative to wages is going to drive even more working class families into even more desperate indebtedness. And if indeed we have the inflation that raises interest rates, which is what most folks who watch this stuff expect, then you're driving the working class into more indebtedness that's going to cost them more in interest. And that's a 1-2 punch they can't handle under these circumstances. And the big retailers in this country know that and are very worried about that. This debt, we've never navigated this situation. What a debt like this means is, think of it as a web that connects every business, every city and state, every household in a web of interdependent flows of interest payments, repayment of principal. We don't know then how a breakdown in any corner, whether it's ships in the harbor of Los Angeles or another upsurge of the Omicron version of the pandemic, etc. This is going to ramify faster than ever before, and in ways and directions there is no way to handle. And we're watching a government that is showing its complete incompetence here. It is pumping money like we've never seen in the history of capitalism into this economy. It is running budgetary deficits like we've never seen. And the silly commentary, as if all of this is doable, don't worry about it, it's all under control. I mean, you really cannot take this seriously. The only thing that's clear is that it's unprecedented, uncharted territory. I can't tell you what's going to happen. I'm not telling you it's going to collapse tomorrow. But if you listen to people who assure you that it won't, then you, everybody, the generalized you, are making a very large mistake. And I would also push back, and I don't mean to scare anybody with this, yet it has to be said, or else again we're living in fantasies. For the first time in a century, the United States is not sitting atop of the world as the big capitalist power that others can only envy. That was true after World War I, when all the other potential contestants for that role were wiped out, or wiped each other out, to be more accurate. The only ones who resurfaced after that, who could have perhaps made an effort to be a second superpower, the Germans and the Japanese, they were destroyed in World War II, so that the last 75 years up to now have been the United States in this extraordinary position. That's over. That's gone. The decline of the United States as a player in the world economy is palpable and clear from all the relevant statistics. But perhaps the most important thing is to understand we now have a competitor. It's called the People's Republic of China. This is as uncharted a territory in this century as is the level of indebtedness. And neither the indebtedness and all that it implies, nor the government's incapacity to figure out quite how to manage this, or the thing in China as a competitor, any one of those should have shaken. But having three of them at the same time, we are not a capitalist planner, and I assume there are some in Washington, looking at this situation, who blithely tells you, we don't have much to worry about, we're coming back. That's silly. That may be for public consumption. You may not want to get your people upset. I get that. But any level-headed looking at this should be very, very worried. And the polarization, it's not just in this country. You see it in Great Britain, starkly. We are in the process of watching the disintegration of the entire Boris Johnson conservative domination of that political scene, or to frighten people in the United States unless they make believe it doesn't count. And Mr. Johnson is not going down because he had an inappropriate Christmas party. He's going down because of an accumulated network of hostile rage at him from all sides that bespeak a system that's disintegrating. The election in Chile between the son of a Nazi German political right-winger whose son shares the same politics, who bemoans the loss of Pinochet when the whole rest of the world understands what a horror that was. The struggles in these polarized societies, I think, is the facade of an underlying situation that capitalism in its old centers, North America, Western Europe, and Japan, is giving way to a new system in Asia, India, China, Brazil, and South America, and so on, that we are in the process of these transitions, and that the fate of capitalism is, for the first time in my lifetime, actually hanging in the balance.
I don't know if you came across this pretty incredible video featuring Hillary Clinton and her concerns about our supply chains and our reliance on China. And in the context of her video, she argued that the United States needs to take back the means of production. As you were talking about China and how China's economy poses a real, competitor to the United States, I couldn't help but think about that statement from Hillary Clinton. What is your response to what she said there?
I feel sad for her. She seems capable of getting really excited about ideas that are very old, maybe not for her, but for those of us who deal with this on a regular basis. Manufacturing, and that's really what she means,
Hmm.
and all the people who talk like that, that's really what they're talking about. Manufacturing in the United States, in terms of the number of people involved, peaked around 1978, 1979. About 20, I mean, these are rough numbers, about 20 million people had jobs. And those were pretty good jobs. They were mostly union jobs, or many of them were. They got union pay. It was the traditional family, so that the one man who worked was supposed to earn enough for the wife to be at home and be a homemaker, and all of that, which is all mostly gone now, but was the idea back as late as that. Every president after that presided over the decline and virtual disappearance of manufacturing. Every president, starting with Reagan, and everyone since, has promised to reverse the decline and so forth. Every president promised it. No president has delivered it. We now have somewhere between 8.5 million people working in manufacturing in non-supervisory roles, according to the same government statistics everybody else relies on. I didn't make these numbers up. That's over. And part of it being over is the decision that she doesn't like to say, so she simply avoids it, that private capitalists would include most of the donors to her campaign and to her political party, made the decisions over the last 40 years to close down manufacturing in this country and move it to China or to India or to Brazil or Lord knows where else. And they're continuing to do it as I speak to you. So these are fantasy. We're going to bring manufacturing back. You remember when Trump trumpeted all of that? Like all the others. It's not a perspective that the two parties disagree on. They are in 100% agreement on the importance of doing bring back manufacture, in her case, bring back the means of production. She probably thought choosing that phrase was clever. But, they promise it with that blithe pretense that this promise hasn't been made 100 times and broken 100 times, that there may in fact be something going on here for which whatever this government has done has been so completely inadequate that someone who doesn't bring forward the idea we need a big change to get a different outcome is one of those people that you think is pretending rather than analyzing. None of this is going to happen because she has figured out what everybody else who's done this work has figured out long ago, that the forces of profit maximization that drove industry out of, for example, the Northeast and the Midwest, we call those areas the Rust Belt. We understand that capitalists who once made things like automobiles in Detroit aren't doing that, have no plans to do that, couldn't in a million years do that. I mean, that's the reality. And against that, you have this shadow boxing, playing around with language. I think one of you said it earlier. My apologies, I don't remember which of you, but that this is a kind of say something because you can't do anything and hope that the saying works as, at least temporarily, a substitute for the doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's, Pramila Jayapal, trying to kind of twist the failure of passing the social spending package as an actual win, because through the negotiations, they were able to, secure some provisions that ultimately are not going to be passed because now that legislation has been shelved. It's strange. Like you're right. Like saying that you're actually representing the best interest, you've actually fought hard and you've secured wins when you haven't really, is a strange way of campaigning. And I think we're going to see the ramifications of that in the midterms. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the point that you're making in regard to like the theater that politics is just devolved to and nothing more, the wrestling match and nothing more. It's I think frustrating for a lot of the voters, especially those who have kind of like thrown their hands in the air and decided, no, I'm not even going to engage in the electoral politics. Why would I? I mean,
Well, I think I agree with you, and in a way, I want to applaud you and the program you're doing and Jacobin, all of it, because there has to be, if we have any hope, those that are willing to put on the table how they actually see it, who are not political people running for office, thinking they have to please the half dozen media that are relevant to their running and all the rest of it, but are willing to say, here is a problem, because in doing that, you begin to create the doubt, the skepticism, the questioning of that theater as such. So that people stop thinking, well, something is better than nothing, and living in that kind of world. And let me give you an example. We have had in the United States depressions before. This is not the first one. And let me remind everyone, over the last 2 years, here's a little statistic to keep in your mind. Over the last 2 years, more than 80 million Americans were unemployed for some period of time. For some, it was only a few weeks. Others, it was the whole time, and everything in between. Over 80 million means more than half of the labor force of the United States, which is roughly 160 million. That's a stunning. Think about that. Over half of our working class, our labor force, as the government counts it, experienced the humiliation, the loss of income, the loss of self-esteem, however you want to put it. We have a literature full of showing that unemployment destabilizes people's physical health, mental health, family connection, relations to their children, and on and on and on. We subjected over half our working class to that experience. That is an amazing reality. That has to be somehow comprehended rather than swept under the rug. But here's the bigger point. We've also had public health disasters. We had the so-called Spanish flu in 1918 that killed a larger percentage of Americans then than have even so far died from COVID. The number of people who died from COVID is larger, but we're a much bigger population than we were a century ago. What we've never had is the coming together at the same time in our country of one of the worst depressions we've had, arguably the second worst, and one of the worst public health disasters we've had, arguably the worst, at the same time, fueling each other, overwhelming each other. What this needs is a response that is in some sense comparable. So you can't use the New Deal as a model, because that was a time when luckily we didn't have a pandemic. We had a very bad depression, but we didn't have a killing pandemic that we weren't competently handling. So we are in a whole new place, like the debt, like China as a competitor. We're in this combination of crises. And what we have just done with Build Back Better is begun with something that wasn't adequate and then ripped it to shreds because we can't move. We're a society that's frozen in its divisions, in its mentalities, and yet the enormity of the economic changes and the political changes we are actually facing seems to be blocked out of consciousness so that we can go on in what in psychology would be called a massive case of denial.
If you enjoyed this video from Jacobin Weekends, please hit like and subscribe. That way, you'll enjoy all of our backlog, as well as all of our future content, including interviews, live streams, and clips. Thank you.